Ladies and gentlemen, the session will now begin. Please welcome to the stage the moderator of this conversation, Andrés Shipani, East and Central Africa Bureau Chief at the Financial Times. And our speaker for the conversation, Jamil Mahouad, former President of the Republic of Ecuador.
Jamil, thank you. Thank you. Over there.
Gracias.
Mr. Shipani, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Andrés Shipani, yes, the East and Central Africa Bureau Chief with the FT, and welcome to this conversation from globalization to fragmentation, the South Atlantic at a crossroads, with former President of Ecuador, Jamil Mahouad, who was also a Nobel Prize nominee as well. Jamil, muchas gracias. This session will be in Spanish, so if you don't mind putting your earphones, those who need them.
They don't like that decision.
Not our decision, for the record. Jamil, bueno, muchas gracias por estar aquí. Los últimos casi 5 años, 4 años y medio, yo he estado viajando mucho alrededor de África y en los años anteriores a eso viajé mucho.
Previous years to that, I also traveled around Latin America a lot, always for the Financial Times. And out of the furthest flung places that I'd been to in the 2 regions, myself as a Latin American, I asked myself the same question time and time again. Why are there no closer bonds between Africa and Latin America? And in fact, I even feel that we continue to move further away from each other, and in such a fragmented world as is the one that we live in, and the new powers that we've seen in recent years. Is that something positive, or is that something that could have consequences? So first off, thanks very much. Secondly, I'd like to say that perhaps the main reason is the way that we've set up Africa on its side and Latin America on its own side in the world. The way that we relate to each other, which leads us to think not horizontally but vertically towards the north. So some analysts do consider that the 19th century was a European century, specifically headed up by the United Kingdom. The 20th century has been a North American century, pretty much straight after the Second World War. The 21st century, the way it's going right now, seems to be Asian, with China and India that's speeding along the track. So in these years that we've gone through, we've seen the bipolarity of the Cold War, Russia and the US. Then, since the fall of the Berlin Wall up until 2017, it was really just quite a unipolar world with this major power that was the US. And then we go into that stage, which is the stage that you're talking about, that is, for some people, multipolar. And for others, they ask themselves the question, which is, are we going to go back to a multipolar system, or are we just in a fragmented system with a whole bunch of countries set up almost as islands that are geographically located close to one another but with no relationship to one another, who was a great social dialogue writer who was part of these dialogues not so long ago. If we take the world map from India across to the east, going through China and going through the countries along the Indian Ocean, there's more people living there than in the rest of the world. So all of those people in the world that are not in that area or from that zone, we're the rest of the world. That's the first piece of information that's relevant here. And if we want to relate this African population to that of Europe, a few years ago, well, a century ago, in more concrete terms, we needed 3 times the population of Africa to get to the European population. 3 Africas would be 1 Europe. And right now we're in a different set of circumstances. 2 Europes would be needed to make up one Africa. And in 2050, it would be 4 Europes necessary to make up one Africa. And so these are really quite shockingly large changes. And it's calculated that from here until 2050, only 45% of the USA will be considered white. So by the end of the century, China will have 700 or 800 million inhabitants less in the world, in a world where there's going to be ever more people. And we will have Africa as the most populated continent on Earth. And that's the world that we're moving around in, and everything that we're conversing and planning, I do feel has to fit into that tendency. So where is it that we're going towards? And this might look like a meeting of 5 people taken by chance. 1 is Chinese, 1's from India, and 3 are from the rest of the world. So are we actually taking that into account when we are planning? That's the first question. Well, yes, if demographics is our destiny, and we know that demographics is the future, as you're saying, well, the average would be such a vast amount of young people. You know, the average age in Africa is between 15 to 19 years of age. And so that makes me rethink something that we wrote about a lot in the Financial Times, which was this cry for Africa. This cry out for Africa, not just China and the US that reinvested in Africa from Congo to, Angola to get minerals out through the port there. But we're talking about Emirates, Qatar, Turkey, India. And then the only Latin American country that was in there that I can maybe think of in this context is Brazil, with the President Lula. He was and he was a guest of honour in the African summit, and we know that Brazil exported $13 million worth from Africa, which was a record. So in terms of the US being able to really take advantage of this African growth, there's a company that they've opened in Angola, sweets company. But what can Latin America bring to the African round table, etc., with everything, so fragmented with all these different powers, Turkey, Emirates to have ports set up in Africa, China that wants to have the infrastructure, railroads, minerals. So what kind of role could Latin America play there in Africa? And to get to that point, how would we actually increase the cooperation between Latin America and Africa? Well, this whole topic of integration has always been a Latin American dream. Our freedom fighters, big freedom fighters, Simón Bolívar, in front of the United States of the North, we had to create the United States of the South. Nevertheless, we've never had success, even within Latin America. Why is this? We've got geographical barriers. Africa's even bigger in size, a lot bigger in size. But we have the Andes, which is a barrier that's almost unbreakable for a lot of things. And then we have that massive Amazon area, which is immense and scarcely populated. And even now, so as to get to this agreement between Mercosur and the EU, there was divisions even within Argentina and within Mercosur. So what is it that we're trying to do, all of us? We're trying to produce things that other people want to buy off of us. So that's what we're talking about. That's what we want to do. If we produce something that other people have already got, then there's no market. So what is it that Latin America has produced? Well, food products. We're a massive food product producer. Raw materials. And we've also produced energy of all different types. Petrol being the most used, you know. And I think in this way, we're quite similar to Africa in the way that we relate to the world. You know, we offer just that. That's about all third world problems. But Latin America has produced something else that's very scarce in the world right now. We are the most at peace continent on the earth right now, and so we're a supplier that you can trust in. There's no wars, there's no terrorism that's going to blow up a gas pipe or an oil pipe, etc. And that's what we've been relying on at the moment. Right now, the train's a fast speed. The world is a fast speed train that's coming through, and we need to ask ourselves, how do we take that train? We never run behind it. First off, because we're never going to reach it. It's fast speed. So we have to think strategically. We have to think, where is this train headed? And what are the next stops on the way? And then we have to get to the next stop and wait for the train there. And what do I mean by this analogy? Well, I think that right now there's two different areas where the future gives both Africa and Latin America possibilities. And the first is the field of energy transition towards greener types of energy. And this is because we are the regions that are considered, these areas that might be useless, such as deserts, and we've got loads of those, can be used as energy sources and cheap energy sources, and we can use those for transition. The other topics, those so-called weird soils, lithium, rare earths. Lithium is in a triangle between Bolivia, some of Paraguay and Chile. That's the largest reserve in Latin America. And so the most logical thing is to set up the plants there. And this is stuff that this high-speed train that's passing through offers us. The question is, therefore, are we going to have the ability to change our agenda? The Latin American agenda is very outdated. Argentina, such an important country in the world, fighting against inflation. I mean, how many countries in the world still have inflation problems? That's like so passé. It was 30 years ago, So these are things that we're fighting against. My country, Ecuador, really bad problem as regards provision of electricity. We had it, but then we had these issues that we run into. But these are things that other countries in the world have already overcome. And we have to set up provisions for in the future. And this whole patents thing between China and the US, they produce 75% of the patents against the world, and 90% of the electronic digital platforms. And so this is an immense distribution, an immense share of that. And so a question for Africa: if you're going to be the most highly populated continent in the planet at the end of this century, are you going to seize that opportunity to turn Africa into a locomotive engine that drags other wagons on behind them? Or are we going to have this massive immigration because of lack of opportunities that I feel could destabilise Europe, in fact? So that's the world that we're dealing with at the moment, and it's within that framework that we have to analyse the possibilities open to us. Well, fragmentation, which we've spoken about, and we know that there's, in a lot of things, we think that this has very little to do with what we're talking about. So the BRICS come to the forefront. Brazil, obviously, is one of the BRIC countries. And the last meeting that they held in Kazan in October, they spoke about this debate of no longer using dollar as the preferred currency for trade. The president-elect of the US, Donald Trump, that is, a week or two ago, threatened countries so that they wouldn't do that. He spoke about the mighty dollar. And you actually wrote a book yourself about dollarization in your country. So why do you think that other countries in Africa, such as Egypt and Ethiopia, and others as well are trying to join the BRICS. Is that a tangible option, a viable option that's going to lead to some type of coordination? I'm not going to say association, but coordination as regards international trade if they're expanded even further. And do you think that potentially that could also contribute to a closer relationship with this policy between Latin America and Africa? I think that these are options that have to be studied very closely and very carefully. There's a lot of great things in this world that started off with just an idea. And when you get a new idea, people's reaction is always the same. You're crazy. This thing's got no future. It's not got a leg to stand on. And then a few years down the line, they end up becoming a reality. So I think that one of the strongest points of the US has been the use of dollars. And why did I opt for dollars as the Ecuadorian currency? Well, first off, we had the worst crisis in a century. We had the phenomenon of El Nino. And this was a whole climate issue. You know what we've been talking about? El Nino destroyed our exports. Petrol went down to less than $7 per barrel, so less than the cost of production. We couldn't export, we couldn't obtain credit. When a country doesn't have dollars and the demand goes up, the price goes through the clouds. Our local currency was depreciated to a brutal extent. And so what year was this all in? This was in January 2000. So in 3 weeks, it'll be 25 years that we've had the dollar in place, and we maintain it because the Ecuadorian people defend it. You know how the politics work along the line, you know. It's a decision of President X. The next one comes along and change it. Well, why hasn't this been changed? Because most Ecuadorians don't want to even speak of any change in currency, because we've had continuous years with minus 10% inflation, which is something that had never been the case before. And they've seen that, you know, we managed to sustain this middle class that started to rise again. And they were subjects of credit. You know, before they wouldn't even be able to buy any sort of machine to liquidize their juice, because they couldn't even buy this blender because their salaries wouldn't allow them. So they were subjects for credit for electrodomestic products, then cars, then houses. And so that's what's defending the dollarization. It's not any president's decision, it's the benefits that they've seen play out. So why did I opt for the dollar? Well, geographically, that's our area, and our external trade was in dollars. We imported and we exported in dollars because Europe, at the same time as I dollarized, went into the euro currency, and so that wasn't even an option at the time. So look at what's happening right now in Argentina. President Milei, a few hours ago, has just said that they will enter into a system of currency competition, that you yourselves as Argentina are going to be able to choose the currency that you want. And all of that changes through time, but we have to really be attentive to it. And within the BRICS group, we've got Brazil. For our friends who are not from Latin America, Brazil represents alone, this is an extension in population and in the size of its economy, more than the rest of the entire Latin America and Central America put together. It's our great continental power. And in football, World Cups won as well. And I'm sorry, I know that I'm speaking to an Argentinian. No offence taken yet. So it is very important. And if we join together China, Russia, Brazil, India, South Africa, the original set of BRICS, we've got this group of world powers that's quite equivalent to the US. It would be GDP that would be equivalent to the US, you know. So we be the 35%, I think. So if we're talking about these distinctions and stuff, we often have to and try and carve ourselves out a path. And I wouldn't try and put myself into the corner of impossible scenarios. And I think that the US president is worried about people leaving the dollar behind, and that's why he's come out the way it has. But the group of countries, BRICS or whoever they are, who decide, having borne in mind Ecuador's dollarization experience, and we'll take on Russian rubles, or we'll take on another currency. What would be your advice to say, be careful with that, or go ahead and do it? So I think that we are very lucky to be in an excellent institution where we're dealing with public policy, and public policy, which is so important in the world. Any public policy, for it to be sustainable and not something that's going to last only a few months, is like a table with only 3 legs. You need one. First off, they have to technically be totally on the ball. Do your homework and analyse the situation of each country. That's first off. Number 2 is what I call the test of the CU for cultural and CO for it's really going to be compatible, which in Spanish is adaptable. So it has to be socially acceptable. And thirdly, it has to be politically feasible, because otherwise, if it's not coalition, at least a basic agreement between the forces that allow all of the legislation to be changed, which binds us to using local currency to adapt it to international currency. If one of the 3 legs of the table is missing, it's not going to end well. And then the treatment's going to be worse than the illness, so to speak. So you should take it case by case. I dollarized. In our case, it went well. And I'm not going out there and telling everyone to dollarize. I'm saying put in practice this 3-legged table model. Yes, but as regards this heavyweight that Brazil is in Latin America, South Africa and Africa, and we're seeing Trump, who's threatening to impose tariffs in Mexico, because we see that between the North American countries, it's, the most heavyweight. Is there going to be a point of, balance where we're going to say, at what point are we able to negotiate this? And what is it that's going to allow us to achieve less fragmentation in a world where under a Trump government, we're going to have more tariffs, more trade barriers? Is all of that going to have a domino effect of more countries joining up, or is it going to be the complete opposite? More countries become divided. India, China, the US would be the resistance of the strongest. Well, survival of the fittest. When I was listening to the dialogues this morning, if the economy and it's a high-speed train, how do we get on? Do we do it one by one, country by country, or do we put together a block and say, so we can stop the train? Or do we say, no, we're not interested in that train. We want another type of train, so we're going to derail that train and make our own train. So that's going to all be worked out on the way, if you like, as we go. Antonio Machado said something similar, and I think that I'm very curious to see what that outcome would be. This world that each day, invites us to take more personal decisions, and each one of us is going to find our best suited pathway, and various factors might coincide along there, various countries might coincide, and when the group coincides, that's when we can take decisions and other people might jump on board as well. I think that the famous word of crisis in China, which how they put it together is the word risk mixed with opportunity, put together with opportunity, and there we are, and we'll choose whether it's a risk or an opportunity. And there's this famous story of the native North American Indians, the grandfather that says to his grandson, the wolf had 2 pups. The female wolf had 2 pups. One was selfish and only thought of himself. The other was generous and thought of everyone else. And the wolf only had food for one. And the grandson asks the grandfather which of the two survived, and the answer was the one that the wolf mother fed. And we have the opportunity within each of us to do either thing. We can take risks; they could turn out badly, but people elect leaders so as to take decisions. A great philosopher, Spanish philosopher, José Ortega y Gasset, said that the human being is fatally cursed or doomed because animals don't make choices. They act by instincts, but we have that capacity to choose between alternatives. And if we, because alternatives are both bad, chooses not to choose, they already chose. So we're doomed, according to that philosopher. And I have that attitude, but I think that we need that so as to be able to advance. So you spoke about opportunities.
Time. Please raise your hand, identify yourself and who you may be associated with. And please remember, it's a question and not a speech. Ottaviano, tudo bem?
Very briefly, fantastic discussion. A clarification, what's at stake at the BRICS is not the replacement of the dollar. It is the use of local currencies. And it's a sort of a scheme through which China is the hub and has the spokes replacing other currencies in the trade relations between the countries. Even the Chinese know that there's no way their currency might replace the dollar unless they open the capital accounts of their economy. So it's a fake. Don't take the declarations by Putin or others about a BRICS currency, because this is a fantasy. A question that I would like to make, Your Excellency, is the following. The option taken by Ecuador in dollarizing brought its benefits and its hardships for Ecuador. Would you say that overall the balance was good for Ecuador to dollarize? Do you think that Argentina is on the same path?
Thank you. Let me answer back in English, this one. So I agree with you and with the BRICS. And the point is not necessary to replace the dollar. If you create a strong competitor, in whatever ways you find it, you are changing the rules of the game of the international trade. So that's the impact and the importance of this group. Going back to Ecuador, she's following you.
Latin America had a scheme such as this in the past. Unfortunately, it was closed because of bankruptcy in some cases of the countries. So there is a precedent in history in Latin America of using local currencies to economize on the use of...
yes. The importance, I would say, is the size of that trade and the impact in the global market. That's the point. Now, in Ecuador, there's something very counterintuitive. You know by definition that when you have your own currency, you can use the currency to promote exports. Let me put this example. If Colombia and Ecuador export bananas, and Ecuador cannot devalue because it has the dollar as the currency, and Colombia can do it, of course the bananas of Colombia will be cheaper in the international markets, and that creates a competition for the Ecuadorian bananas. So that is the big fear from a macroeconomic point of view. Okay, what happened with Ecuador? That we knew that, but we had hyperinflation. One foot inside, we were taking the foot out all the time. So inflation, macro devaluations. So the main person in a firm was not the person dedicated to production, but the person dedicated to the monetary issues, where to put your deposits, how to make joking with them so you can get more benefits. Now, when you eliminate that, you have very stable situation, 20 years of less than 10% inflation. Last year, the inflation of Ecuador was lower than the United States. That's impossible in our radar 25 years ago. And you have a very stable currency by definition, so you can plan for the future. You stop thinking like a casino player and start thinking like any other important entrepreneur in a developed country. That's the advantage. So that's why it is working. Now, Peru has a very responsible system in Latin America, a very stable central bank with very logical policies.
With a very good governor.
With a lot of problems with the national government, a lot of problems in politics.
But the very good steady governor central bank. Yeah.
Colombia has free market, so they can use the valuation as they want, and Ecuador is fixed because of the dollar. Intuitively, what is the country that will export more, according to the traditional way of thinking? Colombia, because they are much more flexible. However, in a study produced in Ecuador, comparing the economies of the three countries, difficult is always to find who do you compare with, because the sizes of the economies, etc., but only new exports, not the traditional ones. The country that developed more exports is Ecuador. It's unbelievable. So that is why I defend the decision. Now, I will never recommend to another country like Argentina to do A, B, or C. First, because presidents don't like to receive public advice if they are not asking for it. Second, because you need to know very deeply the situation in your country. So my invitation is always, please analyze the three legs of the table: politically viable, socially accepted, and economically correct.
Especially they don't like to take advice from other presidents. Thank you very much, Jamil. I think there was a great British actor who's now dead, Albert Finney, who said that the secret to riches is the same as the secret to comedy, and that is timing. So let's see if the timing is ripe for not replacing, but using alternative currencies for global trade. Thank you very much, and thank you very much, everybody, and stay for the next session. Thank you.
Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen,